Hey guys, it's Pastor O'Toole. I want to welcome you to day 8 of the Daily Walk. We are finally in chapter 2, and today's video will actually be the end of week 2. So we're not going to have a video for day 9, and it's really because I want to give you guys an opportunity to study the Word without me distracting you. And so I hope you feel, somewhat comfortable implementing some of the tools that I've offered you from my own personal study, and you're going to be willing to take on a passage for yourself. It's honestly a great passage. It hurt me to kind of give it up. It's one of my personal favorites, but feel free to share with me and others what you guys are able to draw out of it, and I trust it's going to be really good stuff. So before that happens, let's dive into the word that we have for today. Our passage for today is Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. Feel free to pause and ready to potentially hear God's voice through his word. As I began the study, I noticed that this section begins with the word therefore. You may have heard this before. It's kind of hermeneutics, 101, but wherever you see therefore, you want to ask the question of what is it there for? And so if you remember from last week, Paul ended the last section by making it clear to the church in Philippi that they were going to suffer and were called to endure that opposition. So right after saying that, he mentions, therefore, if despite their suffering, there's encouragement, there's comfort, there's common sharing from what? From being united with Christ, from his love. There's tenderness and compassion from the Spirit. If all these things are true, then Paul's saying what should happen is that they are like-minded, right? They have the same love. They are in one spirit, of one mind. You see the word one there again a couple times. And if you remember, we've been circling this word for a while. And the constant circling of words actually just helps bring out what themes are in the book as a whole. So Paul continues, don't do anything with selfish ambition. And if you remember this word again, this phrase, selfish ambition, is one that we used earlier when he compared it to two types of people who are preaching the gospel. Once again, themes. And so rather, he says in verse 3, do things in humility, value others. Don't look quite to your own interests, but look each to the interests of others. If a lot of this is starting to sound familiar, that's a good thing. It kind of helps us get a sense in your mind about what the main things that Paul is trying to communicate to this church are through this letter. He ends the passage we read today by reiterating a point we've talked about before. The church should be unified. The church should seek to give up their own interest or agenda for the sake of other people being blessed, even if it costs them a lot. And Paul says that the fuel that should drive this striving to be unified should be our unity that's first with Christ, who by the grace of God first loved us and united himself with us. Paul is saying because of what he's done, because of the tenderness and compassion of his Spirit, we should be driven to love others in unity. This is a striking passage because Paul seems to be suggesting that there should be joy in these Christians' lives. Despite the fact he's talked about how they're called to suffer, or despite the fact that he's instructed them to give up their own self-interest, despite all of this, Paul says, because of Christ, you should have joy. And that joy will fuel you to do everything else that you've been called to do. So the question we have to wrestle with today is, do we have joy? Not simply happiness, which is temporary, but an everlasting, steadfast hope in Christ, even beyond this world. At a time where it's easy for our minds to be ruled by anxiety and fear, what does it look like for us to live as people of hope? What does it mean for us to be the kind of people that have peace in the midst of a storm? I like to personally remember what Jesus did in storms, how he rested, how he was literally so asleep that the disciples thought he was apathetic to what was going on. But we know he cared deeply about what was happening. Jesus just had a faith that God was in control. I wonder if today that's something you need to do, to rest, to be still. Despite the many things you have on your agenda, despite the many ways your job or life is calling you to be productive, is it possible that today you can find rest? Maybe literally take a nap or have a quiet time in the middle of your day or do a hobby that you enjoy. Perhaps today you can just sit and meditate and give God thanks for the good things that have happened this year. My prayer for you is that you can find peace and joy in the assurance of God's love for you. I'll see you soon.